He didn't kill in rage. He killed in routine. In the heart of Kansas City, behind the doors of an ordinary home, Robert Berdella, the man now known as the Kansas City Butcher, built a dungeon of calculated horror, where pain wasn't a byproduct, it was the point. This isn't just a serial killer story. This is true crime at its most terrifying. Welcome to the crime documentary that dares to read what was never meant to be read. He didn't scream, not at first. Robert Berdella sat calmly on the edge of his stained mattress, pen in hand, as if writing a grocery list. But this was no ordinary note. This was the beginning of what would later be known as one of the most disturbing torture journals in true crime history. 12:35 p.m., first injection, subject still conscious, no resistance. This was the first line, the first entry, and the first victim. In the twisted world of serial killer Robert Berdella, pain wasn't an accident, it was the point. Each line in his notebook detailed acts of calculated cruelty, electric shocks, chemical injections, sexual assault, psychological torture. Nothing was random. Every entry was methodical, cold, clinical. What makes this crime documentary unlike any other is not just what he did, but how he wrote about it. Like a scientist testing hypotheses, Berdella logged variables, reactions, timings, dosages, failures, successes. A true torture journal, and perhaps the most horrifying experiment in modern true crime history. In his mind, these young men weren't victims. They were subjects, each name erased, each identity stripped, reduced to subject number 1, subject done 2, then marked with dates, injuries, and brutal observations. Kansas City didn't know that evil had an address, but that changed the day police found the journals. Dozens of pages, each more graphic than the last, each more depraved, and all of it hidden in plain sight. In the backdrop of 1980s Kansas City, a city grappling with rising crime and economic disparity, Berdella operated beneath the radar. His victims, often young, vulnerable men from marginalized communities, were frequently overlooked by law enforcement and society at large. Many were sex workers, runaways, or addicts. To the world, they were invisible, and that invisibility gave Berdella cover. It wasn't just the brutality of the crimes that shocks the conscience, but how easily they went unnoticed. In a time before widespread media scrutiny and digital footprints, missing persons reports were buried in paperwork or simply ignored. The victims vanished quietly, and Berdella took advantage of every gap in the system. This wasn't just a failure of morality, it was a failure of institutions, police, social services, neighborhoods. Apathy created the perfect storm for a predator who didn't need to hide because no one was really looking. And that's perhaps the most chilling part of this true crime case. Not the blood, not the journals, but the silence that allowed it all to happen. It wasn't just a notebook. To most, it might have looked like a standard composition book. Worn edges, stained cover, pages warped from time and moisture. But this wasn't a journal in the traditional sense. It was a manual for suffering. A torture journal, written by one of the most cold-blooded serial killers in modern American history. Robert Berdella didn't write about remorse. He didn't vent. He documented. Each victim was reduced to a pair of initials. No names, no humanity. Only subjects. Experiments, CP, BB, OW, each marked by date, drug, and wound. Berdella had a system. The left-hand margins were for time stamps, the center for detailed action, and the right-hand column, observations, physical reactions, failures, adjustments. He didn't just want control, he wanted data. CP woke him at 9:30, tied hands above head, swabbed eyes with bleach. The note was almost emotionless, as if describing a morning routine. But it got worse. BB. Injected Drano into throat. Recorded reaction. These were not outbursts of rage. There was no panic, no passion. It was pure calculation. An experimental framework orchestrated in a basement dungeon beneath an ordinary Kansas City home. He logged. Type of restraint used, chemical dosage by milligram. Physical response time to pain stimuli. Duration of consciousness after injections. Berdella was testing limits. How much pain a person could take. How long he could keep them alive. How far he could push without killing them. Too quickly. He wasn't improvising. He was experimenting. Dr. Lisa Rawlins, criminologist, fictional quote. Each page painted a picture, not with ink, but with cruelty. The kind of cruelty that doesn't shout, it whispers. When law enforcement recovered the journals, investigators weren't just horrified, they were stunned by the clarity. Dozens of entries across multiple notebooks, labeled, indexed, calculated. It was as if Berdella believed he'd never be caught, or worse, didn't care if he was. Some experts believe the journals served multiple psychological purposes. One part control, one part obsession, but also a form of ritual. Each entry was not only a memory of what he did, but a trophy, a way to relive it without the body. This was his museum, said one former FBI profiler. Each victim, a living exhibit. As more of the entries surfaced, it became clear. Berdella wasn't experimenting on people, he was erasing them. No birth dates, no backgrounds, no families. Just subject number 1, bound, injected, bleached. Subject number 2, electroshock to genitals. Response, limited. Subject number 3, severed nerve. Documented pain response. Every subject was stripped of identity, emotion, and humanity. The cruelty wasn't just in what he did, it was in how he documented it. This wasn't just a true crime case, it was organized crime of the mind. A one-man laboratory where empathy had long been evicted. And with each carefully printed line, he didn't just record history, he rewrote reality. That's why this crime documentary isn't about blood alone. It's about procedure. It's about how a British gangster might rule with fear, but Berdella ruled with indifference. A gangland hit might be quick and brutal. Berdella's method was slower, colder. He called it control. We call it horror. And it was all there, in the diary. He didn't just want to hurt them, he wanted to own them. Robert Berdella wasn't the kind of serial killer who killed in chaos or compulsion. His crimes weren't driven by rage, they were fueled by control, absolute, clinical, and terrifyingly precise. His house was his lab. His victims unwilling participants in a twisted experiment, and his torture journal, a cold ledger of domination. BB, awake, moaning, injection administered, pulse rate elevated, eyes swollen shut. For many serial killers, the thrill is in the moment, the kill, the climax, the final act. But for Berdella, the true high came long before death. It was in the suffering, in the observation, in the documentation. He didn't need chaos, he needed order. That's what separates Berdella from others in the pantheon of American serial killers. Take Jeffrey Dahmer, for instance, another name forever etched in true crime history. Dahmer also kept records. He preserved bodies, photographed victims. But even Dahmer displayed flickers of remorse. Berdella, none. He wrote about torture the way a scientist logs an experiment. Every chemical, every response, every scream, measured. He tracked physical reactions to various drugs, tolerance to pain levels over time, recovery periods between assaults, emotional responses under sleep deprivation, each variable noted. Every outcome analyzed. His diary wasn't a confession, it was research. Subject CP, eye damage from bleach severe, loss of sight probable, further testing required. That single entry sums up the sadistic mindset that defined Berdella. The psychological horror wasn't just in the acts, it was in the absence of empathy. In the same way an entomologist pins a butterfly to study it, Berdella immobilized human beings, stripped of names, rights, and dignity, just to see how far they could bend before they broke.
People would say, oh yes, I do remember he had these strange-smelling dishes of food, that he had bead bones. And later on, there was speculation, at least in the community and in some aspects of the media, that the remains of your victim were somehow being transported and prepared as meals and prepared as jewelry in your shop.
I was quickly able to identify to the police the other dealers in that section of the market where we rotated potluck rather than eat the flea market food again. And that you could question any of these people, and they'd be able to tell you that the food was good. There was nothing suspect about the turkey or ham or beef.
It was supposed to be another silent morning in Kansas City. But on April 2nd, 1988, something broke the silence. A man, naked, battered, and terrified, sprinted from 43 on Charlotte Street. He wore nothing but a dog collar, his wrists still raw from rope burns. He flagged down a meter reader and gasped a name. Robert Berdella. That man was Christopher Bryson, and his escape didn't just save his life. It cracked open one of the darkest true crime stories in American history. Bryson had been kidnapped days earlier, drugged, raped, tortured. But unlike the others, he survived. And unlike the others, he escaped. And when police took his statement, they didn't quite believe him at first. It sounded too surreal, like a twisted horror script. But when they entered Berdella's house, the nightmare became real. Down in the basement, they found what could only be described as a dungeon. Ropes, chains, a stained mattress, blood, Polaroids of men, some unconscious, others lifeless, and then a stack of notebooks. What those notebooks contained would shock even the most seasoned detectives. Each victim was logged like data in a lab. Dates, times, chemicals, methods, every minute of pain, recorded without remorse, every failed experiment, noted for revision. One officer later told reporters, "It wasn't just a journal, it was a roadmap of murder." Pages upon pages documented injections of sedatives, notes on paralysis, handwritten evaluations of how long a victim stayed conscious. It wasn't emotional, it wasn't angry, it was surgical. The torture journal became the single most chilling piece of evidence in this serial killer case. More disturbing than the photos, more damning than the crime scene. It was a playbook for suffering. Crime scene photos showed syringes, electrical devices, and restraints. Forensic teams found skull fragments in the backyard. As investigators pored over the pages, the house transformed from a quiet suburban home into a crime lab from hell. Courtroom sketches would later depict Robert Berdella sitting expressionless, even as the most graphic sections of his journal were read aloud. Prosecutors called it one of the most detailed torture logs ever seen in U.S. criminal history. Experts from the FBI testified that this wasn't improvisation. It was premeditated, planned, and methodical. This wasn't just a crime documentary in the making. It was an autopsy of control. And Bryson, he became the first and only voice from inside the horror. His testimony, combined with the diary, left no room for doubt. Berdella pled guilty to avoid the death penalty. He was sentenced to life in prison. The escape of Christopher Bryson didn't just end the killing. It gave the dead a voice. It gave the world a window into the mind of a sadist, and it exposed the terrifying possibility that someone could live next door, smile on the sidewalk, and still be running a private hell behind closed doors. In the annals of true crime, the Berdella case remains unforgettable, not just for what he did, but for how he wrote it down. Because in the end, it wasn't just a confession, it was a calculation. Long after the screaming stopped and the walls of the house on Charlotte Street were torn down, the shadow of Robert Berdella still lingered, not just in the memories of those who lived through the terror, but in the systems he broke, the communities he scarred, and the legacy he left behind in blood and ink. Missouri law enforcement, blindsided by the sheer brutality and planning involved, initiated a multi-county task force aimed at identifying signs of calculated torture. For the first time, behavioral patterns extracted from Berdella's notes were turned into templates for future investigations. His crime documentary wasn't filmed, it was written in real time by the killer himself. But the damage wasn't just institutional, it was deeply personal. That trust became a mask, and behind it he committed unthinkable horrors. His betrayal devastated an already marginalized community. LGBTQ+ youth, many of whom turned to Berdella for shelter or support, became easy prey. It forced difficult conversations in Kansas City about who gets believed and who gets protected, and who gets lost. Meanwhile, the media had a field day. Berdella was painted as the Kansas City Butcher, a nickname he never wanted but ultimately defined him. Headlines screamed of his art collection, his antique shop, his knowledge of human anatomy, framing him as the monster hiding behind refinement. Evil wrapped in civility. The American nightmare in a three-piece suit. Years later, journalists and criminologists still refer to his case when discussing cold-blooded killers. FBI profiling programs list Berdella as a textbook example of narcissistic sadism and psychopathy. His torture journal is sometimes referenced in training sessions, not because of the content, but because of the warning it represents. Some killers don't hide their work, they catalog it. His house is gone, the furniture auctioned, the journals locked away. But his legacy remains. A dark chapter in the book of true crime history. And if there's one quote that captures it all, it's this. He hid behind antiques and art, but the real masterpiece was a diary soaked in blood. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.